Module 4. Wood Engraving. Carefully choose a natural wooden block which is cut in cross section. Ensuring that the block chosen is cut at right angles of 7 inches into 7 inches in size. Wood engraving is a relief printing technique which is similar to woodcuts. The difference between wood engraving and woodcut printing is in the output of the prints. Fill the grain of the surface to be carved with whiting powder or white paint and leave it to dry properly, and then polish it with sandpaper to smoothen the surface. Wood engraving produces prints which are more refined and detailed as far as line formations are concerned. The most important technical difference between the two processes of relief printing is that in wood engraving, the part of the wooden block used is the cross section or the end block or end grain of the block of hardwood. If one were to cut a log of wood in a cross section, the sliced portion of the top of the log would be used for wood engraving purposes, and the sides of the log would be used as planks for woodcuts. How this matters is in the natural grain of wood used. In the plank section, the grain is more pronounced and runs parallel. This gives the textural nature lines and spots on the woodcut print. Draw or trace the chosen sketch on the block directly. You can improve the sketch at the time of the final drawing on the block. In the cross-section part of the wood block, the surface is smoother and denser, so there is an ease in carving the block, and finer details can be easily administrated into the block. The grain is tighter to be able to hold more detail. This is the prime reason that wood engraving was the preferred technique for illustrations and religious manuscripts on paper or parchment. The other aspect of wood engraving differing from woodcuts are the tools used. In woodcuts, the tools are flat and sharp with an edge to create the desired mark on the wood block. In wood engraving, the marks made on the block have to be much more sharper and deeper. Hence, the line becomes more pronounced than in woodcuts. While cutters and knives and gaugers are used for woodcuts. In wood engraving, gauges, burins, and gravers are used. The sharp edges of these tools are shaped in a alphabet V to ease the deeper carving process of the wood surface. When seen in hindsight, wood engraving was an evolution of the original woodcut. It allowed the possibility of more precise prints, increasing the ability of making numerous copies from one block. Thus, the medium became the preferred medium of illustrators and publishers. Engraving is one of the oldest of art forms. Engraved motifs and designs can be found in prehistoric bones, stones, cave walls, etc. This technique goes back to the Sumerian period in approximately 3000 BC, where ancient Sumerians engraved cuneiform inscriptions and designs on stone cylinder seals. These were rolled over soft clay to form impressions on tablet form. This is the first rudimentary form of printing press using roller. In China, design imprinted stones and seals have been discovered which prove a presence of a form of rubbing over stone kind of printing technique in 2nd century. These seals and stamps would be made on stone, limestone, wax, and in the later years, bronze and other metals having distinct demarcations of the ruler of kingdom. This led to the innovation of wood blocks, which offered more ease and rapid results. Apart from being less cumbersome as compared to stone, the wood could be easily carved to create fine relief and reused for making multiple copies. The spread of woodblock printing originated with a need to save and preserve the Buddhist text. Hence, the first authenticated prints wrought from wood blocks were Buddhist charms from Japan in 764 and 770 CE. It is also believed that the first wood block on textiles was used by Egyptians in the 6th and 7th century. Textile printing was known in Europe in 16th century, usually of repetitive decorative designs. But printing on paper was developed much later with the innovation of paper in China. The first European paper was made in 1151 at Exetiva, modern Jativa, Spain. Around 1276, France, Germany, and Italy began the manufacture of paper. The making of the very first book documented in the world was the Diamond Sutra, Buddhist discourse, which was made entirely using woodblock printing on the 16-feet paper scroll in 868 CE by Wang Ji in China, but found later in the caves of eastern Turkestan. The text of the Buddhist teachings and the images were all created using woodblocks. The technique of woodblock printing came much later onto Europe in around 1390. Carefully cut out the unprintable negative spaces as per design requirements from the ready block with wood engraving tools or wood engraver machine. The earliest documented stamps, signature and seals with royal imprints was in the royal courts of Henry VI, England in 1436, well before printing technique reached their shores. Woodcuts as art first appeared in Europe during the early Renaissance period. The earliest woodcut is the Madonna with four Virgin Saints in the garden, which dated back to 1480. However, it is believed by some that the 1423 birth Saint Christopher bearing the infant Jesus, found in monastery in Buxim, is the oldest recorded woodcut work. In the 14th century, with the advent of paper being produced in larger quantities, woodcut art took on a significant role. From religious prints to illuminated manuscripts, everything began to be easily produced in larger numbers. It is known that in those times, though the design was carefully cut and cast out, the work usually displayed thick outlines. It was not until master artists like Albert Dürer embraced the medium and raised the art of woodcut to a level of unseen finesse and intricacy. The details he achieved was stunning, considering that each line was created by carving the wood to either side. The history of medium of wood engraving evolved from the oldest printing technique, woodcut, which in Western culture goes back to the 15th century. Enthusiasm for the woodcut waned in Europe after the 16th century, though it would revive again in the 19th century. In 1768, British naturalist and illustrator Thomas Bewick made his first wood engraving using the grain side of the wood block. In this process, the block of wood was carved with the burin, the engraving tool, which creates a finer and more defined rendering than is possible with woodcut tools. Wood engraving blocks were typically made of boxwood or other hardwood, such as lemon wood or cherry, and were expensive because end grain wood must be cut from the section through the trunk a large bug of a tree. This technique also ensured the tonal gradations using only white and black colors. By 1830s, the technique became chosen commercially by publishers and it was used to make copies of literature and illustrate books and storybooks alike. During the first quarter of the 19th century, the process was undergoing rapid mechanical advancements. The blocks were made the same heights and composited alongside movable type of page layouts so printers could produce thousands of copies of illustrated pages with almost no deterioration. The combination of this new wood engraving method and mechanized printing drove the rapid expansion of illustrations in the 19th century. The technique was changed and employed for specific detailed line drawings in the late 1820s, where the engravers gauzed out most of the block, leaving only thin lines of the design on the wood. It became the most common use of wood engraving then on. Much later in 1840s, British-born engraver Frank Leslie immigrated to the United States and developed a means to divide the labor of engraving a block by developing a grid system of designing a block. A single design was divided into a grid and each engraver was given to engrave a single grid or square. The blocks were then assembled into a single image. This process radically reduced the time of engraving each individual block and printing became much easier. Until 1860, engravers had to paint or draw directly on the surface of the block, and the original artwork was actually destroyed by the engraver. In 1860, however, the engraver Thomas Baldwin invented a process for transferring a photograph onto the block. At about the same time, French engravers developed a modified technique, partly a return to that of Bewick, in which cross-hatching, one set of parallel lines cross another at an angle, was almost entirely eliminated. Instead, all tonal gradations were rendered by white lines of varying thickness and closeness, sometimes broken into dots for the darkest areas. This technique appears in Gustave Dor's engraved drawings. Towards the end of the 19th century, a combination of photo on wood process and the increased technical skill initiated by the French school gave wood engraving a new application as a means of reproducing drawings in watercolor wash as opposed to line drawing and actual photographs. This is exemplified in illustrations in the Strand magazine during the 1890s. With the new century, improvements in the half-tone process rendered this kind of reproductive engraving obsolete. In a less sophisticated form, it survived in advertisements and trade catalogs until about 1930. With this change, wood engraving was left free to develop as a creative form in its own right, a movement prefigured in the late 1800s by such artists as Joseph Trohal II and the Baggerstaff brothers. The 20th century saw some artists again reviving their interest in creating original wood engravings. In 1920, the Society of Wood Engravers was established in England by a group of artists which included Gwen Revarart, Eric Gill, Lucien Pissarro, Robert Gibbings, and Philip Hagley. Their annual exhibitions, still held today, have attracted contributions from Claire Lington, John and Paul Nash, and Paul Gauguin. The society continues with annual traveling exhibitions of its members who hail from Britain, Poland, Canada, and the United States, Bulgaria, Japan, the Netherlands, and Australia. In the continuation of wood engraving, an eminent artist, Thomas Bewick, born in 1753. Thomas Bewick was an English engraver and a natural history author. From an early age, he had a keen interest in engraving, and he took to odd jobs such as engraving, cutlery, making of wood blocks for advertisements, and illustrating children's storybooks. His illustrated books gained an appreciative audience when he released his book, A History of Quadrupeds. His first influence was his apprenticeship at age 14 as an engraver with Ralph Belby, with whom he learned how to engrave on wood and metal. For example, marking jewelry and cutlery with family names and coats of arms. In Balby's workshop, Bewick engraved a series of diagrams on wood for Charles Hutton, illustrating a treatise on measurement. He seems thereafter to have devoted himself entirely to engraving on wood, and in 1775 he received a prize from the Royal Society for the encouragement of arts, manufacturers, and commerce for a wood engraving of the Huntsman and the Old Hound from Select Fables by the late Mr. Gay, which he was illustrating. Bewick became a partner and eventually took over the business from Belby. Bewick himself trained quite a few pupils in his skill like John Anderson, Luke Clennell, William Harvey, who come to be known as painters and engravers. His own and later partner, Robert Elliot Bewick, later joined him and ran the business with him. Bewick is the best known for his book, A History of British Birds. Which is admired today mainly for its wood engravings, especially the small, sharply observed and the often humorous vignettes known as tailpiece. The book was the forerunner of all modern field guides. Given his detailed knowledge of the birds of Northumberland, Bewick prepared the illustrations, so Belby was given the task of assembling the text, which he struggled to do. Bewick ended up writing most of the text, which led to the dispute over authorship. Bewick refused to have Belby named as the author, and in the end only Bewick's name appeared on the title page, along with the paragraph of explanation at the end of the preface. He had notably illustrated editions of Aesop's fables throughout his life. He is well known in the wood engraving fraternity for his innovative technical input. Bewick was the first person who began engraving hard boxwood across the grain using metal engraving tools. He produced printing blocks which could be integrated with metal type and were more durable than traditional wood. This brought about a high quality illustrations at a very low cost. Box wood cut across the end grains is hard enough for fine engraving, allowing greater details than in normal wood cutting. This being the dominant method used since Bewick's time. In addition, since a wood engraving is inked on the face, it requires only low pressure to print an image. So the blocks last for many thousands of prints and importantly can be assembled into a page of metal type for ordinary printing in a single run. In contrast, a copper plate engraving is inked in the engraved grooves, the face being wiped clean of ink before printing. So much higher pressure is required and images must be printed separately from the text at far greater expense. Bewick made use of his close observation of nature, his remarkable visual memory, and his sharp eyesight to create accurate and extremely small details in his wood engravings, which proved to be both a strength and a weakness. If properly printed and closely examined, his prints could be seen to convey subtle clues to the character of his natural subjects with humor and feeling. This was achieved by carefully varying the depth of the engraved grooves to provide actual grays, not only black and white, as well as the pattern of the marks to provide texture. But the subtlety of engraving created a serious technical difficulty for his printers. They needed to ink his blocks with just the right amount of ink, mixed so as to be of exactly the right thickness and to press the block to the paper slowly and carefully to obtain a result that would satisfy Barry. Not surprisingly, this made printing slow and expensive. It also created a problem for Bewick's readers. If they lacked his excellent eyesight, they needed a magnifying glass to study his prints, especially the miniature tail pieces. But the effect was transformative, and wood engraving became the main method of illustrating books for a century. The quality of Bewick's engravings attracted a far wider readership to his books than he had expected. His fables and quadrupeds were at the outset intended for children. While convalescing from a dangerous illness in 1812, Bewick turned his attention to a long cherished venture, a large 3-volume edition of The Fables of Aesop and Others, eventually published in 1880. The work is divided into 3 sections. The first has some of Dodley's fables, prefaced by a short prose moral. The second has fables with reflections, in which each story is followed by a prose and a verse moral, and then a lengthy prose reflection. The third, fables in verse, includes fables from other sources in poems by several unnamed authors. Engravings were initially designed on the wood by Bewick and then cut by his apprentices under close supervision. Refined were necessary by himself. This edition used a method that Bewick had pioneered, white line engraving, a dark to light technique in which the lines to remain white are cut out of the wood block. Bewick appears to have had a faultless sense of exactly what line was needed, and above all, where to stop, as if there were no pause for reflection between the image in the mind and the hand on the wood. This skill, which has made later generations of engravers pause in awe, could be explained as an innate talent of genius. But it also came from the constant habit of drawing as a child. The painstaking learning of technique as an apprentice. Thomas Bewick left behind a huge legacy of artworks in the form of books, illustrations, storybooks for children, and numerous other drawings. He died at the age of 75 in 1828. Thomas Bewick Primary School in Newcastle is named after him, and Victoria and Albert Museum has his collections in their archives. He is acknowledged the world over as one of the most innovative and diligent engravers ever to grace the field of wood engraving. After applying the ink to the ready block with the inked ruler, take a trial proof. Health and safety precautions. There are certain health and safety regulations which one ought to be aware of the careful about when making woodblock prints. Number 1. Wood has the tendency to splinter. Hence, depending on the type of wood choosing, one has to be careful while handling it before polishing the surface to smoothness. Number 2. Inks can be water-based or solvent-based, and hence the care has to be taken that if a student has any respiratory allergies, appropriate aeration is provided for. Allergies also need to be considered. Number 3. Sharp tools have to be handled carefully at every stage, as the cutting out and gouging tools can pose a problem to the printmaker if used roughly. Make sure that children are safeguarded from the sharp tools by keeping the tools secured in a box which can be locked. A trial proof is an impression taken before the edition, just to see what the print looks like at that stage of development. Changes can be made to the block after checking the trial proof print. Mark the edition of the print taken. Write all the details of the print, signature and date of making.